Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah, praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ask him to send peace and blessings on his beloved and our beloved Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. So today we read some narrations related to traveling, some hadiths related to traveling. So the first one is about the chapter of Qasr salati fi safar, shortening the prayer in a journey. Journey referring to a certain amount of distance, because technically if we say what is a journey, then any traveling that you do, you go to work and come back, is a journey. You go to drop off it's a trip, right? It's a journey. You drop your kids off at school, right? Or you go up shopping up the road. It's a trip, it's a journey. But what's meant here is such a significant journey in which you can shorten your prayers, which will come in afterwards, inshallah. We'll discuss that. Imam Malik narrated from Ibn Shihab that a man from the tribe of Khalid bin Usayd, or the clan of Khalid bin Usayd, that he asked Abdullah bin Umar, and he said, "Oh, Abdurrahman, that we find," he was discussing with him, that we find that the Salat of fear, which is a Salat of when you're facing the enemy in battle. So there's a Salat, it's called Salatul Khawf. In every fiqh book you find a chapter, in Hadith collections, in the Sunnah you find a section, a chapter on Salatul Khawf. And there's different forms to do it, but basically it's a Salat where half the Salat one is shortened. Is it shortened because of the facing the enemy? So he's asking the question that we found that there's Salatul Khawf and Salat of fear and Salat of Hadr, praying at home. Hadr means not in safar, right? When you're a resident. But we don't find Salatul Safar. We don't find Salat of journey in the Quran. Then Abdullah bin Umar answered, "O son of my brother, indeed Allah has sent Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and we don't know anything except that we do it the way we saw he sallallahu alaihi wasallam did it." Because this is very important to understand, that the practical implementation of the Quran is Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Allah didn't just send the Quran, He sent a teacher with the Quran and someone who implemented the Quran to show how the Quran is to be practiced. So the Sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in the Hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they serve a dual purpose. They're a primary source in Islam themselves, and they're an elaboration, explanation, and tafsir of the Quran. The first tafsir of the Quran is by the Quran itself. Then the tafsir is from the Sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he's making a point. He said, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has shown us. Maybe you can see the connection, not, and then this is going to be coming up afterwards. But he's saying that, why have you excluded yourself specifically? And we have those sort of. He's speaking from an academic perspective and trying to understand. But today we have groups that say Quran only. In some parts of the world they call them Quraniyun. In our parts of the world they call them Munkar Hadith. But basically, if we remove the Hadith, we remove Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I mean, we're talking about the entire teachings of Rasulullah to be just put aside. Then you can interpret things the way you want. You create your own version of Islam and many versions. It's interesting that those guys, the Islam never becomes antithetical or anti-Western or anti-colonial. It always matches with the colonialists. It always matches with the enemies of Islam. It's very convenient type of Islam that every time they put the Sunnah aside, they put Sahaba radiallahu anhum aside, the Islam version of Islam comes up, is very, very conveniently fits with according to their own desires and according to their own convenience. Things never get hard for them. So you can tell that what's driving it is they never come to their version of Islam in which something is strict. No, it's actually the total opposite. It's basically removing those restrictions which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala plays through Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and how the Muslims have always understood it. Right? There's something to be said about the average Muslim, the Muslim community. Right? The average Muslim that has some level of iman and deen, understanding of deen, the average of that has a protective quality in it, that it knows that when the scholar goes off track and starts to talk nonsense, and this has happened, that the Amma sometimes reins in the excesses of the academic. Sometimes some academics can go off thing, and the average person sometimes has more sense. And this is what Rasulullah ﷺ said: the time will come, people will say things that you haven't heard or your fathers haven't heard. They'll try to make it part of Islam, but you didn't hear about it, your fathers didn't hear about it, your grandfathers didn't about it, because our forefathers, if they are Muslims. All of a sudden, something's been told to us that no, this is like there's one group say, no, hijab is not fard. Doing it is one thing, not doing, someone can't do it, can't practice is one thing. But coming out and saying that, there are groups that say that. No, it's not part of the last 1,400 years. Was whatever was happening. People just were guessing, and like that. All of a sudden, there came out something we didn't hear about it. Our parents didn't hear about it. Our grandparents didn't hear about it. The scholars that our parents learned from the Quran from didn't hear about it. Our grandparents who learned the Quran from, they didn't hear about it. But you figured it out. In 2023, you figured it out. But anyway.
What's the hukum for this? The people saying this, like the people saying
each one has to be each has to be judged on his own, because is a person rejecting an ayat of Quran like because if the question is being asked, is this person a Muslim? Definitely we can say this person is a fasiq, that this person is
what they're saying like hijab is not part of the Islam. And they're saying, example, like it's not written in Quran, or do whatever written in Quran, but I'm not going to follow the hadith. What's the hukum for this?
For munkar hadith, because the munkar hadith, the ones who entirely reject the whole body of hadith, like totally, is not Muslim. Because this is something that is so unavoidably, like it's like they are the qat'iyat, like the qat'i things, the non-speculative things, like mutawatir hadith, things that are beyond a shadow of doubt. I mean, the Quran is one, but there's a category of hadith mutawatir, because if they reject the entirety of hadith literature, so they say that all of it, even the ones that are narrated by 100 Sahaba, 70 Sahaba that are narrated from different chains of narration, from a whole generation narrated to a large, I mean, that's what we're talking about. That when they're in that category, then they're not even considered Muslim, because they are negating daruriyat, like the min ad-din, the essentials of deen now. Like, for example, like khutbah hajjatul wida, the idea that 100,000 people that attended there, and all the chain narrations that come of it, that can get together and collude and can make up this hadith, goes against common sense. Corroboration strengthens or authenticates it more. So when there's more chains of narration, like a hadith can be sahih by one chain. Like one chain, if all the conditions are fulfilled in each rawi and narrator in the chain. But when you have large amount, narrating to a large amount, it's not possible. And they reject that as well. So this is like one category. Then among them there are different shades. So outright, I mean, I can give you which one is, but then there's some people that might be just saying out of jahl, they might not fully understand. So each one has to be judged, because it's a matter of, if we're talking about Islam and kufr, Islam and takfir, then takfir thing is a very sensitive matter and has to be judged in each person's statement. The ummah, there's an agreement in the ummah, اتفقت الأمة على جواز القصر في السفر. There is agreement, there's ittifaq, there's an agreement in the ummah that salat is shortened when traveling, from 4 rakats to 2 rakat. You can't shorten fajr, and you can't shorten maghrib. You shorten zuhr, asr, and isha. So the 4 rakat salats, they can be shortened to 2 in journey. The mufassirun, the scholars, the commentators of the Quran, they differ in regards to the ayat Quran, وَإِذَا ضَرَبْتُمْ فِي الْأَرْضِ فَلَيْسَ عَلَيْكُمْ جُنَاحٌ, that when you set out in the land, in Surah Nisa, ayat number 101, that there's no blame upon you, I mean there's no sin upon you, right? So is this ayat regarding safar, and it coincidentally was salatul khawf, because there was 2 things happening. One was they were out in an expedition, so they were musafir. Secondly, they were also they were in a battle, so they were encountering the enemy. So it's Salatul Khawf. Now, is this qasr, is this ayat referring to, so the ayat is being using a reference for shortening prayers in traveling, is this talking about salat of safar, or is it talking about khawf? So some say that this ayat is revealed regarding safar, and it coincidentally it's a coincidence that it has khawf. While others say no, this is regarding khawf. This ayat is regarding salatul khawf, the specific prayer of fear, and we'll go through salatul khawf later on, inshallah, in the chapter. Basically, like half the army faces the enemy, half pray, and then the other half, then they take turns, so that the whole army is not praying at the same time with the imam, with the ruler. So others say that this is regarding Salatul Khawf, and the Safar is coincidental. And the second view is what is Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu's view, and built upon that is, Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu has this second view, that meaning that if he's saying, because the man asked him about an ayat al-Quran, and when he doesn't produce ayat al-Quran, then he must have held the other view, that this ayat is regarding Salat al-Khawf. But the next ayat that continues, إِذَا كُنْتَ فِيهِمْ, that this is regarding ayat al-Qasr, not mentioned, because it doesn't mention khawf. So the majority say that qasr is wajib. Imam Shafi rahimahullah is of the view that if he wants, he has a choice. He can complete the prayer, he can do 4, or he can do qasr. But qasr is better. Someone is musafir, according to Imam Shafi, he can do 4, or he can do 2, and 2 is better. Imam Hanifa rahmatullah said no, he has to pray. He has to pray 2. He has to pray 2. There's no choice in his wajib to pray 2. The next chapter continues. It's related to that. The two rakats in safar. Imam Malik narrated from Salih bin Kaysan, who narrated from Urwa bin Zubair, who narrated from Aisha radiallahu anha, the wife of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that she said, Salat was made fard, and it was 2 rakat initially. Salat was fard, and it was 2 rakats in hadr and in safar, when someone is in residence and while they're traveling. So it's 2 rakat originally, and then the 2 rakat remained in safar, but was increased in hadr. Right? It was increased in resident when you're not traveling. So the original was how much? 2. And then in traveling and while you're resident was 2 rakats. And then later on, the salat in residence in hadr was increased to 4. Right? So it was increased to 4. So the original was 2. And this is what the meaning that, according to the Hanafi scholar, Imam Hanif and the Hanafi scholars, that the fard salat of a musafir cannot be anything except for 2 rakats. The distance in which if we intended that we are allowed to shorten the prayers. Imam Malik narrated from Nafi', from Abdullah bin Umar, that he traveled to Khaybar and he shortened his prayer. Does anybody know how far Khaybar is from Medina? About 150 k's approximately. So as far as I remember, it's 150 k's. So when he traveled to Khaybar, it's near Madinah Munawwarra. So as far as I remember, it's about 150 kilometers. I can just check it on Google, Medina to Khaybar. You can check it. 150, no?
No, it's less than that.
It will be today have a look. They're 170 kilometers according to Google Maps. It's even further.
What classifies you one as a traveller? The shortest distance to be traveled to?
That's what the chapter we're in. So giving examples of travels where Sahaba, so he's saying that Abdullah bin Umar shortened, so according to Google Maps, it's 170 kilometers. I thought it was 150 kilometers. So he shortened his prayers. So we got one distance there. Imam Malik narrated from Ibn Shihab, who narrated from Salih bin Abdullah, who narrated from his father, that he rode to Reim, and he shortened his prayers in that distance. These are different, and this is a certain distance, right? Imam Malik narrated from Nafi', who narrated from Salih bin Abdullah, that Abdullah bin Umar, he rode to Dhatun Nasb, and he shortened his prayers. And this was Arbat Burud. This is like, I think the explanation is coming after. This is where we get the 2 distances from. There is one view that the distance is, what's the distance? Does anybody know? For sure? 80 kilometers. Rounded up 80, 78 kilometers, 79, 81, 82. Like you hear different, 80 kilometers.
Yeah, when Khaybar and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said to them to pray Asr in Khaybar.
No, that was Banu, are you referring to Banu Qurayza or Khaybar?
Yeah, Khaybar.
Okay.
Yeah, when after the Khandaq.
Yeah.
They said to pray Asr in Khaybar.
No, that was Banu Qurayza in Madinah Munawwarra. Salat al-Asr, yeah, to pray Salat al-Asr there. That's not to do with Musafir, that's to do with the timing of Asr Salat. So one group prayed early, one prayed later. So Imam Malik, so 80 kilometers is a famous one. In Hanbali fiqh, the distance, as per the books, what he mentioned, and there's a reason why, and I'll explain that at the end of this section, that why do we have different distances among the slightly different variations? Because trying to pinpoint exactly what this, in modern, converting to modern distances, right? So one is that you do have places from this place to this place. All right, so we know 170, that's a very long distance. That covers all the distance of all the Imams, right? Now it mentions that he reached Abdullah bin Abbas radiallahu. Malik narrated that he's reached him, that Abdullah bin Abbas radiallahu. Now you're getting another Imam who's got another madrasa, is one of the mujtahid Imams of the Sahaba radiallahu, Abdullah bin Abbas radiallahu. He lived in Makkah and he lived in Ta'if. He's buried in Ta'if. That's where his masjid was, that's where he used to teach. So he used to travel there. So he used to shorten his prayers, and that's about 80 kilometers or so. So there's like these modern distances have been recalculated in the last several hundred years, as you know, because mapping has improved and so forth. So although there's old distance, then there's another. وفي مثل ما بين مكة وعسفان, these are the famous cases that are used. وفي مثل ما بين مكة وجدة, Jeddah, city of Jeddah. So those were the locations in that time as well. So these places were measured. Now, depending on it's not as the crow flies, and it's not according to the route that is given in Google Maps is what? New highways and so forth. Is that the distance that they would have taken? Maybe it overlines. We know that the Hijra road is not the highway that is taken, for example, between Makkah and Medina. That's not the old route. The old route's still there. There's parts of it. It crosses into it with the highways, but actually it's a different road to that. They had to look for the easiest route to make for modern roads. So we have to be mindful of that. The distances that they're traveling on the roads, those roads are not necessarily the roads that are today. So we take point A, point B, and then put in Google Maps like I just did, and then I generate an amount. Oh, look, 170 kilometers. Here's a new distance that we can tell the Muslims. This is that we can travel. No. Those old routes, the maps of that exist as well. Imam Yahya said, and Malik said, this arba burud, and Yahya said, قال مالك وذلك أحب ما سمعته يقصر في صلاة إلي. So he said that this is the most beloved to me, this distance. And with Shihab bin Salim Abdullah, and he narrated from Abdullah bin Umar, that he used to shorten his prayers of a complete day. Masiratul yawm tam, like a 24 hours journey. Like if you're traveling for a complete day, that's the journey. Not a physical distance, but the time it takes you to travel a day. Now, how long did it take you to travel a complete day? Day and night, if you travel, we don't know. We know because of the books what they mention, but we don't know. If we drive for complete day and night, we'll reach Perth, or like half. Yeah, we'll be right 2,000 kilometers exactly. So that's a very different distance to traveling by foot or by camel. I mean, people used to travel 20, 30, 40 kilometers in a day if they went set out for a journey. So he said, Abdullah bin Umar, he used to shorten in the travel of a day. Imam Malik narrated from Nafi that he used to travel with Abdullah bin Umar, and he would not shorten the prayers, right? So there were certain journeys that he didn't shorten the prayers, right? So Imam Hanifa rahmatullah said it's the journey of 3 days. Actually, what the Hanafi mazhab is, journey of 3 days. And in Alamgiriya, the Fatawa Alamgiriya, and in Fatawa Hindiya, Fatawa Alamgiriya, what it mentions is that if a journey is of a day, 3 days, and you travel from morning till evening, and you start very early in the morning, and you walk until the middle of the day, and you continue to travel, like that's the journey he's talking about. How much would you cover in that? Now, when they were riding this, people were still using camels. Like in Fatawa Hindiya was compiled 250 or so years ago. They were still riding horses and camels, and the same means of transportation was literally till 100 years ago. So people can actually, and Imam Shafi said that the four burad, these four distances, it's 16 farsakh. Farsakh, parsang in English, and basically they all come to roughly, even the Hanbalis who say that the distance actually is 138 kilometers. The official position of Hanbali madhab is 138 kilometers. But even many Hanbalis, including my teachers, they follow the 80 kilometer, because the 80 kilometer is a revised position based on new data that's available, and they've compared it. So if we checked the Maliki, Shafis and Hanafis as well, there's a whole discussion. This is a very big topic. I was reading one of the risala of Mufti Rashid Rahmatullah alayhi from Karachi, and he's written like 20 pages, 30 pages, something like that on this issue, because revisiting it, and and then there's the English mile. Which miles are we talking about? There's the Persian mile, right? The parsang is different for different. The Persian distance of this is, so over time we've lost. If you look even in fiqh books about qullatan, the water measure that we consider a lot, where if najasa falls is not. If you look at the measurements, each country, like the Shami ritl is different from the Masri one, different from the Hijazi one, the Iraqi one's got every country. Wasn't so standardized, right? What we have today is like very standardized. Like in Australia, we follow the metric system. In the US, they follow the imperial system, isn't it? So the old system, miles and ounces and so forth. So even it affected fiqh as well. And when they came up with these numbers like kilometers, which ones are they referring to? The next masala is about when is it permissible to shorten the prayers? When one exit the houses of the village, I mean the boundary of the village or town. Imam Malik narrated from Nafi', who narrated from Abdullah bin Umar, that when he used to go for Hajj. Why is Abdullah bin Umar so important? Because Abdullah bin Umar's actions are in light. He's a Sahabi. He's Umar bin Khattab's son, but he's known among the companions of Prophet ﷺ for his extreme. He's got a stamp from the senior Sahaba for his extreme istiqamat, despite all the ikhtilafat and all the fitan that came afterwards. He was noted by the senior Sahaba as a person did not he did not change, he did not budge, that he stuck to. So his actions, they're not just anybody's actions. They are a person who was he strictly adhered to what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, what he took from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So his actions are, the Sahaba and fatwas and actions, are incorporated into Islamic jurisprudence. So Imam Malik narrated from Nafi, who narrated from Abdullah bin Umar, that when he went for Hajj and he went for Umrah, that he used to shorten his Salat at Dhul Hulayfa. Because when you come from Madinah Munawwarra, the miqat, the boundary from which you have to make ihram, for the people of Madinah Munawwarra, the residents of Madinah Munawwarra, even us when we go for Umrah, if we go to Medina first, where do we make ihram for? Not from here, not from Qatar and Dubai and Abu Dhabi, all the other places that we go to Umrah. If we're going to Madinah Munawwarra first, then we're staying in Madinah Munawwarra, then we're like a muqim there, we're staying the resident there, we make our ihram before we cross the boundary of Dhul Hulayfa or Bir Ali, right? The masjid is there, and the people, hundreds and hundreds of showers are there for the mu'tamirin, for the people that can do their preparation and travel for Umrah or for Hajj. So he's a resident of Madinah Munawwarra. So when did he? So Dhul Hulayfa is out now. It's part of the Medina city. It's still a little bit outside, but it's part of Madinah Munawwarra because it's a big metropolis now, a big city. But in the old days, it was on the outskirts of Medina, it was outside Madinah Munawwarra. That meaning that once he left the boundary of Medina, the house of Madinah Munawwarra, and he was in Dhul Hulayfa, he started doing qasr. He did qasr there. He shortened his prayers there. So from that, Yahya said that Imam Malik said that a person who intends journey, he should not shorten his prayers until he's exited the boundary of the city. He still does a full salat. I asked my teacher this, and he said that this applies there's ikhtilaf on this even today as well, because the cities are so big today. All right, so one of my teachers from Kuwait, what he said it applies today, that if you're in the boundary of the city, in our case Melbourne Munawwarra, Melbourne Sharif in Melbourne, so if you're in the boundary of Melbourne, including Tullamarine Airport, the journey technically hasn't started. You haven't exited the boundary of the city, because the airport is in the boundary of Melbourne, and it's even gotten more bigger as well. Melton is now included part of Melbourne officially, like a month ago. Yeah, no, it's part of. It's technically part of technically. I mean, officially for how do you define the boundary of a city for Sharia purposes? It's when there's a gap, when the houses stop, and there's a long gap in it. But as far as I can see, Melbourne is now, like Melton is pretty much connected now to Melbourne. Like the houses are Like they got like little suburbs, Rockbank, and in between there's all these strange suburbs you never heard of before, but they've somehow reached out, and as soon as they included in it, they got, what is it, an extra 10,000 people as population Melbourne. We've got more people than Sydney. We're the biggest city in Australia. That happened last month. I don't know if you know, but anyway. So if you leave the boundaries of a city, in the old days a city and a town was so small. 100 years ago, 150 years ago, during the British, in colonial India, like the British had, they systemized a lot of things. They had a definition of a city. Now our definition of city is very different. Like if a city is like what we used to, okay, 3-4 million, it's like a small city in our mind. At 20 million, Karachi, Bombay, Dhaka, like okay, 10 million, 20 million, this is like Cairo. That's a city. That's a big city. 3-4 million is a small city, and getting a little bit bigger. Adelaide, and this is a city, but in Perth, this is a city, but is it really a big city? Like in our mind. But in the British time, a city was classified as a population of 100,000. 100,000. Karachi was, I was reading something, the history of Karachi somewhere, when it was classified as a city officially. Now population of Karachi is how much? 25 million or something. But he goes 150 years ago it was like only, it was when it reached 100,000, now it's officially a city. Now that's in the recent era, but historically cities were never that, 10,000 was considered pretty big. There were big, huge cities, metropolis, Baghdad and Damascus and so forth. But once you reach that, you're again. So when he talks about a village, a qarya, or a town, right, that people generally lived in small towns. So that as soon as the farming area starts, or the boundary of the city ends, the last house ends, after that you can make qasr. Wallahu alam. So, some ulama say that applies to modern cities as well. Others say no, the modern cities are so big now, in some parts of Europe, some parts in England, the cities are like just one city ends, another one starts. Another one ends, another one starts. They said it refers to the, quote unquote, the super council, what do you call it? Like the Shire, what do we call Manningham? Manningham's a city, like the city of Manningham, but there's another word for it, like the Shire or the super council. Shire is more the country one, isn't it?
Shire is the countryside.
And the city, they call it a city, but there's another word for it, like a super council, which is made up of multiple suburbs, like Whitehorse and Manningham. Some say that the boundary of that is the defined when you can make qasr. Wallahu alam. But as for if you look at the text, the text in fiqh books, the ibara is very clear. He said when the boundary, and here it's Imam Malik is saying when the houses stop. So the modern things can also, in Melbourne, we do have a clear border. There is an end to Melbourne. It doesn't connect with another city really. So there is to be safe, it would be to shorten our prayers once we've flown out of Melbourne. I'll just finish this. We'll stop there, inshallah. I think that